Staying with South Sudan, the UN says the long-delayed Regional Protection Force is making progress despite obstructions from the government. It's warned that as the humanitarian situation worsens, at least half the country is in need of food aid. CGTN's Harper reports from New York.
The United Nations peacekeeping chief Jean-Pierre Lacroix says the Regional Protection Force, or the RPF, has begun arriving in South Sudan's capital of Juba. But the 4,000-strong force, approved by the United Nations Security Council, is nowhere near full strength. Lacroix hopes the main bodies of the RPF will arrive by late July, but he said there are still complications. The South Sudanese government has now identified a second plot of land that the troops would be based upon. But the United Nations mission is saying that they have reservations about access to the site. And throughout the whole deployment process, the UN has criticised the government for what Lacroix again called obstructions. Well, this was the first update on how the RPF is progressing. And briefing the UN Security Council, Lacroix also spoke about the humanitarian situation, which he said still needed much work.
The people of South Sudan remain desperate for peace. More than half of the country requires food aid despite its tremendous potential for food production. 1/3 of the country's population is displaced. Half of those displaced are refugees, with 50,000 having arrived in Uganda each month of this year. Record numbers have fled to Sudan, and Kenya and Ethiopia are also hosting thousands of South Sudanese.
Well, the UN's World Food Programme on Wednesday declared that South Sudan was no longer in a state of famine. But they made it clear that help was still needed, as only half of the UN's appeal fund of $1.6 billion this year has so far been donated. Lacroix also reiterated that the situation in South Sudan was a man-made tragedy. He said things like the UN mission and the RPF were only a panacea, and that a will to end the conflict was needed in order to bring peace to the country. He also warned that the latest ceasefire, agreed by the government and the opposition last month, had not yet materialised, and that hostilities have persisted well after the ceasefire commitment. Harper, CGTN, New York.